afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next in our Regional Water Planning webinar series. My name is Mark Masters, Director of the Georgia Water Planning and Policy Center, and I'm joined today by Sarah Skinner and Nikki Dixon from the Water Policy Center, and just appreciate everybody making some time this afternoon to participate. As I mentioned, this is the fourth in our series of these regional water planning webinars. We're going to hear from two experts related to challenges and opportunities related to septic management in Georgia. And this is a topic that has kind of raised itself in the last few meetings at a number of our councils. So we felt like it was a good topic for one of these events. Sarah, if you don't mind, we'll go to the next slide, and just a little bit of a reminder about this process in this series. The Water Policy Center, as most of you know, starting a number of months ago, have been supporting all 10 regional water planning councils. And as part of that work for Georgia EPD, we felt like this webinar series was a good opportunity to not just, have a learning experience and support you all as Regional Water Planning Council members. It's obviously an information sharing time, but it also just gives an opportunity for folks around the state to sort of, kind of unite around a common topic, learn from each other, and just have an opportunity to interact. And so, as that third bullet points out, for those of people that were not able to join us live today, this is being recorded. It is going to be posted to the Regional Water Planning website, and so it will be a resource for folks going forward. So with that said, I want to get straight away into the content. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Skinner, to do a little bit more table setting and introduce our speakers for this afternoon. So Sarah.
Thank you, Mark. I'm Sarah Skinner. I wanted to give you a little bit of planning context for our topic today. Went through all of the plans briefly, but I encourage you each to go through your own individual council's plan. Here's a little bit of background. Most of the council plans recognize septic systems in the resource assessments and also identify septic management as a need. There are some common septic related management practices that appear across multiple plans. And one of the big ones is public education and outreach for septic maintenance. You'll also find local wastewater master planning and mapping that also encourage septic mapping. You'll see an assessment of regional septic receiving and some possible targeted conversion to centralized sewer as a management practice. And then, of course, recommendations on monitoring and studies to quantify septic impacts in your region. And then we also wanted to give you a couple of things to possibly consider as you're entering the update of the plan. And these are some things that you can consider at the council level, and that is number, age, and geographic concentration of septic systems in your region, impacts of failing or aging systems, specifically identifying high-risk watersheds, and then septic hauling and receiving capacity, and also coordination with departments of public health, and then certainly technology and innovation that has occurred since the last plan update. We've had really impactful septic discussions and the formal panel discussions at a couple of the councils recently. If this is something that you'd like to dig into deeper at your council level, just let your staff liaison know, that the Georgia Water Planning and Policy Center staff person know, and they can help coordinate that. Also wanted to give you the link for where you can find recordings for past webinars. We'll get this one up on this website as well. You can either follow that web link, and this QR code takes you there as well. And I'm going to leave it on this slide for folks to get those links while I cover some logistics for the webinar. We've got a good chat. Nikki and I will both be monitoring the chat while our presenters are speaking today. And so if you've got a question, you can put it in the chat or use the raise hand feature, and we'll make sure that your questions get answered, and your questions get heard, rather. And with that, we'll go on with our speakers. I've got brief bios that I'm going to read for each of our speakers, and then I will turn it over to them. Dr. Krista Capps is a freshwater ecologist. She earned her BS in biology and political science from Hope College, a Master of Science in Environmental Science from the School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University, and a PhD from the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at Cornell University. Krista holds a joint position through the Odum School of Ecology and the Savannah River Ecology Lab at the University of Georgia. And Dr. Nandita Guar is a soil physicist and remote sensing expert. She earned a bachelor's in civil engineering from Punjab Engineering College in India, a PhD from the Department of Biological and Agricultural Engineering at Texas A&M University. Nandita is faculty in the Department of Crop and Soil Sciences at the University of Georgia. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. And Krista, we see your first slide.
Great, thanks so much. And I just want to say thank you so much. Nandita and I both love being professors at the University of Georgia in part because of our land grant mission. And giving presentations like this, it's something that really motivates us. And we're excited to support y'all and this amazing state. Nandita and I both are two faculty who spend a lot of time thinking about decentralized wastewater, but I want to highlight that the University of Georgia has many different faculty who are approaching these questions. And so if something comes up today that we don't talk about, but you're concerned about, please feel free to contact us because we might be able to put you in contact with the right person. We're going to go ahead. Let's see. We wanted to make sure that you could access, you're going to get QR codes today. I apologize for this, but we can also send links. If you use this QR code, this will take you to a link of resources that Nandita and I have put together about some of the information we're going to be presenting today. And it also includes a copy of these slides. So if you wanted to refer back to the slides later, that's there. But the purpose of today's discussion really is first to listen to you and your questions, to figure out what your concerns are, and we can have follow-up. So today is just the beginning, potentially, of a conversation with you and with your council and to support decision-making around decentralized wastewater. We're going to talk about briefly about how, in a cursory way, I looked at how decentralized wastewater infrastructure is actually integrated into the regional water plans. We're going to discuss some of the common challenges that we see, some gaps in the water planning that could be addressed with this new plan if it's of interest. And then we'll give you some ideas of some tools and support that we and colleagues could provide if it's of interest to your group. So the reason why we are interested in decentralized wastewater is because everyone uses wastewater infrastructure every day, and many Americans are dependent upon on-site or decentralized wastewater systems. Many times these systems are septic systems, and you can see an image of that here. The proportion of homes on septic systems, if we map the US, we can see that the proportion is different in different states, but the Southeast in particular has a lot of communities that are dependent on decentralized wastewater. So this is really important. Now, one of the common things that septic systems are noted for, or people think, is that they're responsible for a lot of, or what I should say is, when they fail, it's really bad. And one of the questions is, if the effects of failing systems, is it due to catastrophic failures of single systems like you can see here in this picture, or is this a broader scale problem? And that's where planning for this at the watershed level in your groups is really essential. So the lifespan of a septic system is thought to be about 15 to 40 years. And as of 2021, the median housing age in the US is about 37 years. So what this suggests is that with our decentralized infrastructure, a lot of those systems may be at the point of aging out, and they may be compromised in their function. There can be multiple types of failure of a given on-site wastewater system. It can be acute system damage, like tree falling through in the leach field, fires. It can also be because of the high water table coming up. Now, one of the things that has come up, and I think the Water Policy Center will be able to help people think through this issue, is the latest ruling to remove seasonally inundated wetlands from the Clean Water Act might actually worsen this issue if it allows more permissive plans to put septic systems in areas where the water table might be higher. So apparently this was one of our colleagues here at the university was talking about this being a major issue in Florida in the late 90s with water quality. There's also hydraulic failure, which you can see here. I think it looks like dead Oscar the Grouch on your lawn, and then, or if systems back up into your homes. But one of the reasons why we're here today is because of the potential problems with nutrient and bacterial pollution that systems can cause at the larger watershed scale, which is your planning unit. The other reason why I think this is really important to think about now is that situations like extreme weather events like Hurricane Helene, we've seen how this can compromise a lot of water infrastructure, including wastewater infrastructure. And these extreme weather events are expected to continue and potentially worsen through time. So thinking about these questions and planning for it is especially important. Another reason to think about this is thinking about compromised watersheds in the state of Georgia. Now, these data are from 2020. This was the EPD listing of stream reaches that are considered impaired at the federal level. And you can see that map here, and it covers a lot of our state and many of probably your favorite stream reaches in the state are compromised by this. And we need to try to figure out and assess when decentralized wastewater might be leading to this and how we can plan for it and what decisions and investments we're going to make to deal with that. So as I said, Nandita and I have spent a lot of time, well, relative to some people, not that much time, but the last few years, especially, we've spent a lot of time thinking about wastewater infrastructure, especially decentralized. And I organized a listening session to bring experts, and this included water managers, sustainability folks from different counties, water professionals through the Georgia Association of Water Professionals, people that are associated with Guar, which has to do with the on-site wastewater community in Georgia, pumpers and haulers. And we brought them together to just talk and think about major challenges that are facing decentralized wastewater infrastructure in our state. And I used these questions to go through the state water management plan and try to identify how the state water plan actually discusses or considers decentralized wastewater. So this is a disclaimer. I reviewed this information over a few hours when we were prepping for this talk. And so I wanted to try, Nandita and I really wanted to try to do something that was relevant to your decision making and to support you in thinking about things. So this was not a deep dive into this, full disclaimer. So that's been said. But I categorize these into things like septic forecasting. So this is talking about thinking about septic systems, where they're located, other things like that. Water quality concerns, where they're saying septic and on-site systems are potential risks. Septic maintenance and education. So this is inspection, maintenance, and that outreach and extension. Decentralized wastewater planning. So this is actually thinking about where to grow, where to change, and maybe move to centralized wastewater. Pardon me. And then septage management. So septage is the solid and liquid stuff that you find in a given septic tank. And that is what gets pumped and removed when we have pumpers and haulers come to our home to support maintenance of that system. It is difficult. There are some challenges associated with managing septage and legal septage disposal. So that was one. So then what I did is I took those and I went through each of the regional water plans and I tried to highlight and identify where certain things were identified within given plans. So each of the rows that you see here is a different plan. And these were the 3 plans where, so almost all of the plans, I think all of the plans actually address septic forecasting, water quality concerns, and there was some discussion of septic maintenance education. There were only 3 plans that talked a little bit about decentralized wastewater planning. So thinking about mapping, moving, discussing how decisions are going to be made in the future. And then septage management, it's even a little bit less discussed. So it's limited, or for the rest of the plans, this planning part and this management part for septage were not really covered. So I think that this would be like these 2 things. Nandita and I decided to focus our talk on these 2 kind of categories and just identifying them as a potential place to grow. So decentralized wastewater is a difficult thing to manage at multiple levels. So this is a challenge for the state, thinking about public health department and regulations for installation, etc. It's a challenge for municipalities, thinking about where you're going to grow, what parts of the water infrastructure might be contributing to stream pollution. It's a challenge for water planning districts because you have to have this network thinking at the watershed level, with one jurisdiction making a decision that could affect other jurisdictions downstream. And it's a challenge at the parcel level for a homeowner who might not have the resources to maintain their systems. This is where we want to just plug and say, again, as a land grant institution, and because the UGA has the extension office, there are folks who can support the water planning districts, that can support municipalities, etc., in making these decisions or giving you the best information available. And we just want to highlight that here. So each county in the state has dedicated extension agents, and they can actually help do training associated with the system itself and thinking about public health and the environment for permitting, etc. So those are resources we can address at the university if it would be helpful. So again, I'm going back to these ideas about planning for the future and managing septage, and we're really going to focus our talk on this scale, thinking about issues that are really going to impact the water planning districts. All right, so who moves in very strange places in this country? And I don't know if y'all saw this. Nandita always describes this slide and this image in such a more nuanced and sounding professional way. But when this article came out and they were talking about sewage sludge sitting in Alabama, and then that feces and that poop train was actually from New York City, this blew my mind. But moving waste around is a very complicated situation. And the reason it moves around is for a lot of different reasons. But this is what we call the septage problem. And in the state water plan, it says Georgia faces environmental and health hazards associated with the illegal disposal of septage. Now, this is very understandable in some cases because septage affects the costs of all of these aspects of wastewater treatment. So this is preliminary treatment, solids handling, disposal costs, everything. Septage affects all of this. But it also has other costs that are linked to, for example, costs that fall on the pumpers and haulers. So the cost of gasoline, the cost of dealing with insurance and other things like that. All of these things are going in, and they make on-site wastewater maintenance more expensive. And so one of the things we did with colleagues, including folks at the EPD, these data were collected in 2014, so they need to be updated. What we wanted to do is figure out how much capacity the state of Georgia had to deal with the septage, the stuff we're pumping out of septic systems, relative to what the need would be if we were actually pumping all of our systems at the EPA recommended level. So we get our systems pumped about every 2 to 3 years. What we did was we contacted different NPDES permits, so the permitted facilities in the state, and we estimated what the septic disposal capacity was. We were able to get a response from a lot of them, and it's important to note that there was a private septic facility in White County that was accepting 150,000 gallons a day, but this has been shut down. So Many of these places are limited for how much septage they could accept per day. Then we estimated at the county level the septage disposal needs. We estimated, we made the assumption that every system that we were dealing with had the capacity of 1,000 gallons. And then we asked if we were pumping every 2 to 3 years based on EPA recommendations, what the disposal needs were. Then we subtracted those. And this is the one that I want you to really notice. Anything that's this light green and dark, so light green, yellow, orange, or red, these are counties that do not have enough capacity to handle their own septage. And again, the landscape for this has changed. These data were collected in 2014, and it seems to be getting worse. But what this means at the watershed level is that certain counties are going to be needing to accept septage from other counties if that is the case, and if we're going to start addressing this situation. So thinking about septage and where septage is going and what resources you have to legally dispose of septage that's economically feasible for homeowners, pumpers and haulers, and the municipalities is a really big challenge that I think water planning districts are going to face. And I also want to say that this problem can be more acute in some watersheds than others. And intermunicipal collaboration is essential when we're thinking about this at the watershed level. Okay, the next thing that we need to talk about is planning. So what are some of the steps where water planning districts can really get involved in planning? So the state water plan, again, talks about inspection and maintenance ordinances, monitoring and management, and then how to support implementation of these voluntary guidelines. But the first step for these activities is to know where your systems are located and estimate what condition they're in. And I'm briefly going to talk about this. So one of the things that we have found as we've been working is a lot of jurisdictions, for very good reasons, don't know where all their systems are located. This is a problem because if failing septic systems are a source of non-point source pollution, counties are trying to address this issue. But how do they decide which areas and which systems are actually a problem? So we go to Athens-Clarke County, where we are here, and Nandita and I've been working really, it's been a fabulous relationship with our county, but we have it's between 9,000 and 10,000 systems. And with the data and with this collaboration between the county and our labs, we've been able.
I'm on a conference call here.
Oh.
I get it. Okay.
Should I keep going? Okay. So because of that, we've been able to take a lot of paper-based data. So these, all the records about system siting and other things like that, these manifests, and we've been able to put them into a mapping. And so what you're seeing here in this map is all of our systems in Athens, and they are mapped. You can see them out by sub-watersheds here, but they are also, we know what their system ages are, and then we can also include some information like the type of soil, the slope, and how close they are to streams in our analyses. So we can start highlighting some different issues and make priorities based on system age and location and other things. And so Nandita is going to take it over now and talk about some of the other ways we've approached studying these systems and actually trying to assess their impact on the environment.
Okay, thank you, Krista. So yeah, like Krista said, Athens-Clarke County is fabulous. They have collected a lot of data. They've been very invested into it, but a lot of times counties may not have the resources to pull this information together. They wouldn't know. They would have an idea where their systems are, but they would have to look into a filing cabinet at an environmental health office to identify where a system might be located. So through a regional water planning seed grant, actually, we wanted to figure out if using data that might be easily available to several different counties, we can figure out a way to create a map of septic systems and estimating ages of these systems across counties so that this is something everyone could apply everywhere, and we could have a statewide or larger map of where these septic systems are and how old these are. So to do that, we developed this septic system age and location tool. Krista, could you switch the next slide? Yeah, so this tool is called the SALT Toolbox. It's a septic system automated age and location toolbox. And this is built in a software called Arc Pro, which is basically just a software which helps us create these maps. And you can actually look at these maps and start making several different decisions. But what I'll talk about right now is the idea behind this toolbox. And this toolbox is just an automated fancy way of running that idea. But what we did was we said, well, if we have a map of parcels of in a county, and we put on top of it a transparent layer of where buildings within the county are located. For example, I have an idea of where all the buildings in the county are, through whatever source, maybe a picture that I've taken from the air, through satellite imagery. I just need to have an idea of where different buildings within the county are. And I put this transparent layer onto the map of parcels. Now, all of a sudden, I know which parcels have buildings on them. And ideally, each parcel with a building has to be connected to some form of wastewater treatment. Now, further on, if we overlay another transparent layer with all the sewer lines marked on it on the same map, now we know where these different parcels have buildings and how close they are to different sewer lines. So the idea is if you're within a certain distance of the sewer line, then you should be connected to that, and everything else outside of that, any building, any parcel with a building should be hooked up to a septic system. So it's very straightforward. And using that idea, we created a map we created a map of septic system locations for Jackson County. And I want to give a huge shout out to Jackson County, Georgia, because they were wonderful with providing any data. Their GIS department was so responsive. I mean, huge shout out to them. This project was possible only because of them. But surprisingly, I mean, I actually was surprised. We got a 94% accuracy on the data that we validated this toolbox with of where septic systems might be located. The other thing that this can do is it can estimate an age of the system. And again, that's really straightforward. If this transparent layer of buildings that I talked about, if you have this a layer of buildings from, or if you have this transparent layer from 2001, say, versus 2020, like I've shown in this diagram, then you can figure out at what time a building first pops up on a parcel. So the instant or the first time that the building pops up on a parcel, and if it's in an area where it should be on a septic system, we can say that that system is at least that old. For example, if a parcel had a building on it in 2020, but not in 2001, we know that the septic system on that parcel is probably as old as 2020, but not as old as 2001. So we can start figuring out how old these systems are. And clearly, system age is a huge factor in understanding septic system failure. So we again ran that analysis for Jackson County, Georgia, and we found there were 16,314 parcels that were on septic systems before 2001, and then about 4,058 were added post that until 2020. We didn't have a lot of data to validate that. But once we have this parcel level data, what's really interesting is that we do have an idea of what the soils, distance to streams, what the slope or lay of the land is. We do have data sets nationally available for that kind of stuff. And bringing these two pieces of information together, we can start really understanding what's the environmental conditions these systems are located in. And further, if a jurisdiction collects just a little more data, we can start answering some really insightful questions. We're going to come back briefly to Athens Clarke County, who had at this point collected data on where systems were repaired and when they were repaired, and they had records of where systems were pumped. This was done through a student actually from Krista's group, or I think it was several students who went into Athens Clarke County, and they digitized these pumping manifests, and then they brought it all and put it on a map and started looking at where these systems were either pumped or repaired. And we used an idea to figure out, I mean, there was no data on failure. We had no idea where systems were failing or why they were failing. So we decided to use ancillary information such as, well, if a homeowner pumps their system, say twice a year, uh, that's likely indicating some sort of failure. I mean, no one would want to spend that kind of money without wanting to, without there being a problem. So we use that data set to estimate where failures might have occurred. And in this map for Athens-Clarke County, you can see the colors show ages. The cooler blue colors are newer systems, and the hotter red colors are older systems. And the size of these circles indicate the amount of septic that's pumped out of these systems. And again, if a huge quantity, more than what that tank can hold, is being pumped out of the system, then it's likely a failure as well. So we notice that these colors occur in clusters, and in a lot of cases, these bigger size circles also seem to be clustered together. So again, there might be some patterns, but just to kind of look at it, you'll have to squint. So what I really want to bring your attention to is this map that we created. So we started figuring out, well, there might be some sort of pattern going on behind the scenes, which primes the area or which creates condition for septic systems to fail. So on this map, these pink dots that you see, these are actual instances of failure. This is what the data showed us based on our analysis. And then we developed a model that we wanted to develop a model that might be helpful for planning at the watershed level. And what we noticed was when we built this model, and these areas that are highlighted in the yellows and reds, this is what our model predicts as areas where failure is highly likely. And we noticed that most of the clusters where systems are failing in clusters can be identified through the use of this model. And this was encouraging to a large extent because if there are certain sort of interventions, if you want to prioritize an area for septic system management, we now, through available data sets on environmental data like we showed and septic system locations, we can start to figure out what areas need to be prioritized for septic system management. So this is something that takes the parcel level information, which can be very hairy and all over the place, but bring it down, scale it up to a watershed scale level where you can start making decisions. And with that, I'll pass it back to Krista to talk about Stephanie's work.
And we just wanted to highlight that one of the other things that we know and recognize is that dealing with wastewater planning, wastewater infrastructure planning is really expensive, and most jurisdictions are dealing with very limited resources. But our colleague, Stephanie Rogers at Auburn, is actually has developed a tool to actually help communities figure out what cost optimal growth patterns would be with different types of wastewater infrastructure. So Stephanie couldn't be here with us today, but we wanted to highlight this, that it is something that you can use. And she also uses fairly relatively available data to actually do this type of planning. So this is also a support where research at land grant institutions, even if they're in Alabama, can help with. And so again, we just want to say that if you have any questions, you can look at all of the resources that we've put in that QR code, and that'll take you to a Google folder. You should have access to all of those documents. Please feel free to share them if they're useful for you. And we'd like to thank all of these people, especially all of those students who helped get most of those data from paper into maps. And then if you would like to be part of future discussions about decentralized wastewater, here's a different QR code that'll take you to a form that you can share or to fill out, and we'll get your information. And that's all we have. And we'd like to thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. Fascinating information. I'm going to facilitate question and answer now. If council members and observers have any questions, feel free to chime in at this time. You can use the raise hand feature. You can use the chat. Got one from Phil Odum. Phil, go ahead.
Good morning. Yes. Would this presentation be able to be given at a local level? Here in Liberty County on the coast, we have in the planning purposes, a water council based kind of on the state process. And the information I received today is going to come in real handy because we have a meeting on the 18th. And I would have a new group of elected officials coming in at the first of the year. And I'd like to see if we could schedule something like this. Would that be possible?
Yeah, Nanda, so I can't speak for Nandita, but we are very excited to share the septic message. So yes, we are both busy and have small children, but we would do our best to attend. Online presentations are always easier, but Nandita, what do you want to say?
Well, definitely online.
Oh yeah.
Because that would be beneficial because we have such a high water table here that I'm vice chairman of our planning commission, and we have such a high water table that the dream of houses and then they faced with, I can't do septic, and that's stifling our economic growth. And my elected officials are now beginning to see the need for a centralized countywide wastewater system, and they're struggling in understanding the data that could drive them forward. And what y'all presented today, I find very encouraging.
I'm happy to present. I will be out of the country on the 18th, so I can try and be available, but it might depend on what time this is scheduled for.
And I was called for jury duty, so we'll see.
I can make the connection over email with you
that
and
would be great.
coordinate from there. All right,
Well,
thank you, Phil.
I appreciate it.
And Tony. Tony, did you have a question? Tony, you may be on mute.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
I didn't know if y'all were controlling that or not. So mine is questions and comments. So you're doing a bit of a mix of the management of the septic system itself and the age of the septic system and how that needs to be done. For me, a larger issue is kind of what Phil was bringing up. There's a disconnect around the septage management about where septage is disposed of. And so what I would be interested in, the disconnect that I see is you don't build wastewater treatment plants to treat septage. And for the most part, I don't believe county governments manage where septage is disposed. It's just like you take it where you can and you hope that a wastewater treatment plant will accept it in your district. I'm really interested in how many governments, if any at all, manage where the disposal of septage has to go in their county. Because to me, without this, if you will, without some, I'm going to use the word centralized here, without some centralized management that determines where septage goes, so that then you can coordinate with the owner of a wastewater plant to be able for them to accept that septage, right? So unless a county owns it, most of the, they're rural in nature. They're outside of incorporated areas if they've got, but you've got some situations in the state where cities actually own wastewater treatment plants and won't accept septage at their own wastewater plant. And there's nowhere else to take it in their whole county. So for me, the real issue in the state is we're not holistically managing where disposal is going to be, where it's going to go, and building treatment plants that are designed to handle that load. You know how you showed that slide, which was really great, about all the taxing things or the increased expense for septage? That's the problem with it. Then that's why you don't take it. It's because of all of that part of it. So you just have to get lucky on where to dispose of it. And one of my clients was Bullitt County, and I met with them a month ago and listened to them talk about the fact that they only had 2 small treatment plants outside of the county where they could take their waste. And even then, when you had heavy rainfalls, those plants, the flow through the plant was so fast you couldn't keep the septic in there long enough without violating the permit. And so when the haulers needed to pump the most because it was wet and the ground was saturated and people's systems weren't functioning, they couldn't take it to the plant because the plants couldn't accept it. But at any rate, I'm throwing like a million different things at you, but I see the real concern or problem with septic in the state more around where you dispose of it and how do you actually have a system in place to manage knowing where septic will be disposed.
Yeah, and what I will say is yes, everything you just said, yes, yes, yes. This is a problem that not just Georgia is facing, but Georgia is definitely facing this problem. The information I showed you again is over a decade old, so and it's getting what like individual discussions, not a big analysis, kind of indicate is that that situation is actually getting worse because a lot of places that say they accept septic will accept it, but they'll charge exorbitant fees. So yes, that is why I am, if I stand on any soapbox, I am standing on the soapbox of septic. Everything you just said is a huge issue, which is why we're really excited we're talking to this group of people, because it has to be coordinated at a watershed area. And what I would say is our personal experience in dealing with Athens-Clarke County, the reason why I ended up getting involved in this, and then Nandita kind of, I don't even remember how that all happened, but this woman named Cheryl Shaw was mapping where all of the septic was coming from in Athens. And she was finding that people were bringing septic from Tennessee to come to Athens because they were charging so little for that processing. One of our 3 wastewater treatment plants in our county accepts septic. It is very complex from a chemical perspective, as you mentioned. So if you have changes in flow, septic is even harder. So you have to have a treatment like people in charge that are very experienced and understand what's going on when they do that. It is not an easy thing, but Athens, after they realized how many people were bringing their way, so how much of Atlanta was coming to Athens to dispose of their septic, they ended up restricting where septic can come from.
Right.
And they restricted it to J-Boom, which is the upper Oconee. So it's Jackson, Madison, basically anyone that if they illegally disposed of it in the watershed up there, it would come and affect us down here.
That's a neat parallel. I like that. You're
Right.
protecting the watershed by accepting it.
Yes. Yes. And so septic is a state problem. It's a local problem, but it's a watershed problem. Like that is the biggest level of spatial scale where it's the biggest problem, because if someone else has a policy and there's nowhere to put it, people are still going to have their systems pumped. And
Right.
the pumpers and haulers every pumper and hauler I have met, I think Nandita feels the same way, is an amazing human being. They also need to feed their families. And so there is this tension of they are providing this really important and essential service, but if costs get out, so if you have to drive 500 miles to get rid of waste, how much gas did you just spend? How much do you have to charge the family to pump their system? So it's a complicated issue, but everything you said is right. But I do think within a watershed planning district, you could do these small surveys to figure out what the landscape looks like. What are the options? What are some resilience things that you might have if Hurricane Helene comes in and people's wastewater plants go down for a while? Where could you pivot? All of those things can be done in your planning groups.
Well, and let me say this. So you were talking like I don't know if you use the word extravagant or, they're very expensive. They're probably not really. They're probably more in line with what they're supposed to be. Because what you'll find, when I went to a meeting the other day, they were disposing of it, 1,000 gallons for $120. I mean, that's
Mhm.
stealing.
Mhm.
And you're also dumping decades of waste in some instances. The problem here is, again, the counties somehow have to take ownership about where waste goes and contract for that disposal. Then you'll have capacity at a plant, and they need to be able to direct it to a plant. And in that way, when someone knows revenue's coming, they can have it, and you could either build or modify a plant to take that waste. I'm just giving you my thoughts on the topic. And then in addition to that, the problem with disposal of septic is you pay for it one time in a gazillion years. You don't have any recurring revenue for a centralized treatment plant to take that. The reason centralized treatment plants are economically viable is you get recurring monthly revenue. You can retire debt, you can annuitize the capital investment. People dump sewage. Most of the time, they only dump it when the system's like failing, not every 7 years, which may be a benchmark. But if they were paying monthly or annually, and when they dumped it, they didn't have to pay anything else, you'd have recurring revenue, and then people would probably manage their systems more like they're supposed to. I kind of see that connection, so that governments, just like they charge to haul off your garbage in rural areas, or you pay a fee because you take it generally to a centralized station to dump it. It's that kind of thing. But I think you've got to have recurring revenue. And the truth is, the disposal cost itself, not the transportation and not the hauling and taking it out, but the cost of disposing and treating of that waste is nowhere near where it's supposed to be. And it's not enough income for these plants to take that waste. So that's where I'd see another disconnect in this whole thing. I have 20 years of septic and I can dump mine for $1,000, but then one day you're not going to have anywhere to take it because the plant's not going to take it for $120. They're just not.
Can I chime in with a question about the fee? Does it seem like the fee is used more as a way to show what kind of capacity they have at that current moment than recouping their facility
No, I
maintenance
think what
fees?
I think what happens on small systems, they see that as a lot of money. I mean, if you're a real small place, you see $120 to dump as real income.
Mm-hmm.
I think y'all, Krista and Nandita, y'all have a better sense maybe of what those fees are, but I'm just telling you the load is so caustic. What you
Mm-hmm.
pay when you dump it is generally not near what you're putting on that plant. But anyway,
So
I'm
data
running
from,
on. I'll quit.
you're fine. Data from the Metro District indicate that a lot of the plants that have the capacity to accept are increasing their prices a lot. And some of the increases, and I have never talked to anyone about what their motivation are, but some of the increases in the cost is so expensive that it almost seems as if it's being used as a deterrent.
Yeah, don't.
But I can't speak to that. We can look at the Metro District does their annual septic survey. And we actually, in one of the papers we have, Danny Johnson is one of the authors. We wrote this paper with him and Keith Higgs and Dave Bloyer from Athens Clarke County. And so they helped us frame that story, but it almost seems as a deterrent after it hits a certain price.
Phil, you got another question?
Yeah, real quick,
Mhm.
I agree with Tony. The economics of supplying water and treating waste are out of sync with reality. In my county, engineers tell me it's 3 times the cost to treat than it is to deliver, and the revenue stream is not there. But I do like the idea that y'all are taking the watershed approach and looking at septic in that aspect. To give you a little bit of history, 20 years ago when this whole process started, the Scientific Advisory Committee tried to get the politicians to adopt our state plan by watersheds. And instead, we were divided up into political regions. So you've got that process to deal with. The General Assembly's got to rewrite some state laws for us to be able to use watershed as a driving factor in developing best management practices. That's something I've seen. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for that perspective. Any other questions or comments from we got Gail. Gail, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, I got it. It's got an extra step in there. Anyway, the conversation we just had, as we think about the management practices and the plans, there are a number of plans that for centralized sewer, for wastewater disposal via centralized sewer, they emphasize master planning. And so I'm wondering if those recommendations for master planning are a place to connect some of the septic planning in. And so this question is probably as much for those of y'all who have experience at the county level, or at the facility level, with managing wastewater systems, as for Krista and Nandita, but we appreciate feedback from any of y'all on it.
Yeah, I would say that's outside my area. But what I will say is at the national level and every level down, no one is planning for septage. And it's not just septage, it's decentralized wastewater. I think it's because of how it's managed, because of how it's installed. So, but I think that is a question for others.
Yeah, that's out of my wheelhouse too. I think Stephanie's work to some extent might be looking into that because she's looking at these different wastewater treatment systems, centralized sewer versus community septic systems versus individual septic systems to see which is most cost effective. But yeah, that's outside of my area of expertise too.
Gail, let me ask this question. Are you talking about the master plans for sewer systems when a government develops, a utility develops a master plan?
Yeah, really for the treatment plant.
Right.
So that component of the sewer system, yes.
Yeah, I think most of the time what happens is when those plants are developed or they do master planning, they're developing them for customers and they view those customers as either currently connected to the centralized system or future connections to the system, which might pick up some sewer systems if you build, but it gets so expensive to build centralized into existing residential properties that it doesn't happen. But the problem is the ownership of the disposal issue. For instance, somebody brought it up the other day. I'm wondering if where it's missing is that it's not included in the service delivery strategies, where the government takes some ownership for how it's going to manage septage in its county. See what I'm saying? Then you run into a situation like Bullitt County where literally no one will accept it in the county proper. Well, what are they going to do with their septage? So, I don't mean to sound whatever, and I don't know why this excites me.
It's exciting. I want to make sure.
I can almost get passionate about it, but it comes down to that government having responsibility and county commissions, and I say that because that's where most of the septage is. It's more rural. It may be and I'm not familiar with Metro Atlanta and all that, but so much I'm familiar with the part of the state where you really get rural, and it's county commissions, and I promise you, they don't sit around when they're doing their planning and go, oh, y'all, you know what? I forgot. We need to see what we're going to do about our septic that needs to be disposed of from this many septic tanks in our county. They're not having that conversation. Bullock wasn't having it, and I point them out because they're just recent and I'm familiar with them. They weren't having it until actually the haulers came to them. And you're right to applaud the haulers. They're doing the best they can. But they basically came to Bullitt County and said, hey, y'all, we've got a real problem. We've only got 2 places to go. After that, we have to haul it to Savannah. And by the way, their number of septic tanks had grown by some crazy number. They just had a study done on it. So it's really interesting. Y'all want to get a hold of that literature. This engineering firm did a little study for them, but the nice thing about it was, or one of the interesting pieces of information was, it showed how much there had been a proliferation of new septic systems and how it was kind of exploding on, and then that's coupled with the fact that they need to have a place to dispose of septic.
Tony, I appreciate your passion and thank you so much for bringing up these issues. I want to make sure we have a time for Alex's question, and we're running up on about 2 minutes left. To
Yeah,
be
thank
continued,
you.
Tony. Alex?
Yeah, I've just got a question. So as a homeowner, and I wanted to look at this as a homeowner, you know, recently purchased a property in the country, and I have my new home is on a septic system. What is the conversation you have with these owners that have invested significant, let's just call it capital, in a sewer system for their property, and moving them possibly into centralized wastes, where one, they have the capital, but they're also going to be absorbing somewhere in the range of $600 to $1,000 a year in sewer costs, that, you know, because they're typically out of city, so they're paying, you know, out of rates. And so that's my thought, because I know if they ran sewer down my road, I wouldn't be jumping on the bandwagon to plug into it because of the added cost and infrastructure. So what are the conversations that are typically had with those kind of homeowners?
So again, I think that's outside the scope of what we do. We do study individual systems, but we need lots of permission to go in and study people's wastewater. What I do know is, at least in the conversations that I've been part of in Athens, they're trying to get the best available information they can for which areas might be most problematic. But then it's all about feasibility, about the ability to extend sewer out, because sewer is not cost effective until it is. That's what I always say. So if you look at Athens, Clarke County, like what I think most places look like under the ground is we are a nested, complicated mixture of sewer and septic systems intertwined in that, because sewer expands out, and there are very good reasons for that. I do know that it is very costly to have these connections. I do know that that means that certain communities are going to be able to join that effort, and others are going to have to say no unless there's other supports to connect. I do know that even in Athens, a few of our friends have had their houses redone and they're on sewer and they're in the middle of town, but then they find out from their contractor that in fact the previous owner never connected. So, you know, I do think there are lots of problems swirling there, but again, that is outside the area of what we study, but I think it's a really big issue.
Yep. And we're right at time. And if anyone else has questions for our speakers today, you're welcome to send them to me or to our info@h2opolicycenter.org address, and we can get it to our speakers. Let me just ask, in 20 seconds or less, speakers, if you had a call to action for our council members for the next plan update in terms of septic opportunities and challenges in our state, what would it be?
Well, I would say involve yourself in discussions about septic and where it's going within your watershed area. Nandita?
I would say let's get all the data together to start answering all these wonderful questions at watershed level. I mean, we need that to even have evidence-based discussions.
Absolutely. Well, we thank you so much for your expertise today. As always, these topics, the conversations about septic generate so many more questions than I think we start with. But I think that's a good thing, and we'll keep it going in the plan update process as we move forward. Thank you, Dr. Katz, Dr. Guar. Appreciate it. Thank you,
so much for the
members.
opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. Thank
Thank
you
you.
to our members and to our participants. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye.